We then realized that it may not be a good idea and not possible to go to different places and do the programs every time. So we started with the e-learning, starting off with the free YouTube videos. And there are over 400 videos which are available freely in that perspective. And these videos basically are accessible to across the globe. And a lot of people have been accessing these videos over this time. And as we are looking at currently, there are a lot of people who are subscribing even to this program as well. So there are over 1.5 million views which have been given in these videos in terms of this e-learning program. We then realized that we needed to have a structured program rather than just having some videos. So we started off first with a fellowship program from 2017. And till date in the Regency Center of Diabetes Endocrinology and Research, we have had 11 fellows who have been involved. And I remember Dr. Kapoor, when we went for the first time, and he said that, yes, we should start the program. It was one of the few centers which started the program at that point of time. So in the last 7 years, continuously, we have got very good fellows and with good support from the hospital. In 2018, we started the online learning portal MediClasses, and then a lot of books and application came up. So we have got pediatric endocrine learning tools. We have got fellowship programs in pediatric endocrinology, a 2-year course. And many of the people who are here actually are part of that course. They are coming 4 times in a 2-year period to gain experience, clinical, as well as learning in that perspective. We have developed the MediClasses Endocrinology app, which I was talking about. It's the most downloaded pediatric endocrinology app with over 5,000 installs, a lot of publications coming onto it. We are working in terms of developing connected clinics, which will help out people develop personalized care in terms of specific disorders. So we have developed tools to guide evaluation for growth failure, which have been validated. There are tools for management of diabetic ketoacidosis, which have been shown to reduce the complications of DKA. We have developed a bone age application, which provides within 2 minutes a reliable and valid way to assess bone age, which has already been published. A lot of other interpreters are there, which are being published, include our obesity interpreter, our puberty interpreter, as well as thyroid interpreter. So these interpreters are going to make life very easy. You have to enter the values and you will get the right outcome. And they have been validated in a large number of patients in that perspective. We also developed a DSD interpreter. And the next step, which Vibha was talking about, was the bone age assisted interpretation of growth, in which all the pediatricians have to do is to enter some basic information with regards to the child in terms of their age, in terms of their birth weight and other parameters. And then you have to enter about their pubertal status. And then you can either have a manual entry of bone age, or you can have a data which you have to select the sites and get the right data in terms of bone age. Now, this bone age assisted interpretation of growth is a tool we have been using and validating for the last 1 year in our center. And this has been found to be perfect in terms of not only plotting the data, but also getting a lot of interpretation and whether our puberty and growth is going normal or not. So this is going to be probably a way in which we can really screen a large number of normal children, as well as patients who are coming to different pediatricians in terms of school, as well as clinic, to get the right guidance in terms of evaluation and management from that regards. So we've got different courses. We have on-site course. So we have had 7 on-site courses till now. And yesterday we had a big number of around 48 participants from across the world, actually, and over 300 patients who had come from different parts of the country to specifically come and get exposed in this perspective. We have got multiple publications, and we have now coming up today with the 2nd edition of MediClasses Basic Pediatric Endocrinology.
Girls with hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. I'll be talking about how to induce their puberty and how to basically, what are the fertility options available for them. Now, this subgroup of delayed puberty girls is very special because their gonads are normal and they can have normal fertility. How we are going to do our pubertal induction is very important. And because they go for their pubertal induction to the endocrinologist, to the pediatric endocrinologist specifically, it's very important for us infertility specialists that we have a good dialogue happening amongst you and us. So I'm not going to go into details of the etiology of hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, but definitely there is constitutional delay, there are acquired causes, but we are most interested in the idiopathic form of hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, which is the Kalamin syndrome and the, basically all the other genetic causes and also the functional causes, that is the anorexia nervosa and all the others. So they generally would present as delayed puberty, disruption of puberty, which is basically onset of Thilaci is there, but more than 4 years, there's no Menarche, primary or secondary amenorrhea. And our congenital patients generally present with delayed puberty or primary amenorrhea. If a patient is presenting with delayed puberty for more than 18 years, it's most likely going to be idiopathic hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, and the delayed the CDGP is completely ruled out. So coming on to why we want to basically importantly induce their puberty, even if it is CDGP. So if you have a 12 to 13-year-old girl, and these days we have so many anxiety disorders for very minimal things. So imagine a girl with no breasts, not having periods, to be fit in with the girls of adolescent age group. So it's very important to take care of their psychosexual health besides their future fertility. So their current goals are also very important. So what are the goals of pubertal induction? Definitely we want to have natural development of breast and uterus for their optimal size and growth, for their future fertility, as well as their current goals as well. We want them to have a good adolescent growth spurt. We don't want to give them a very high dose of estrogen straight away so that their bones fuse and they don't have their final height, which is too short. And then that's the time for acquiring peak bone mass, and estrogen is the key hormone. And finally, also their psychosocial health, which is very important for their growth, psychological health, and avoiding all the other disorders that come with it. So what are the pubertal induction regimes? So if you look at all the steps, most important, when to start. So 12 to 13 years. Usually these patients don't present at that age. So all patients of delayed puberty generally present quite late to us for pubertal induction. And they are diagnosed late. Similar case would be of hypergonadotropic hypogonadism, something like a Turner's syndrome. Those patients present quite early because they have other features of, short height and sometimes even the Turner's syndrome classical features. In them, it's very important to, and that's for the gynecologist, that to involve the endocrinologist because they are short height, and if we start pubertal induction too early in them, you can have a poor final height. So it's very important for all the other cases of hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, start as soon as they come. Now, how to start? Start with a very low dose, 10% of the adult dose. Go slow, gradually built up. So try to mimic the natural puberty, which happens from Thilaci to Menarche. It's 2 to 2.5 years. That's what we want to mimic. Small monthly increments. And progesterone is one drug that we adult gynecologists are very, very used to because we are afraid of unopposed estrogen causing endometrial hyperplasia and future cancer. But in this particular case, we have to take our hands away from progesterone for a very long time because progesterone will actually interfere with the final uterine size and the final breast size. So estrogen, after 2.5 years of estrogen or when bleeding starts, add progesterone. And if the starting dose of estrogen is too high, there will be quick development of endometrial, periods will start early. We'll have to start progesterone early and it will compromise. So it's very important how you start, when you start, and how to progress. So what are the estrogens available? We've got the oral estrogen available. In India, we don't have the patches, but we have some of the transdermal estrogen also available. So with the oral estrogen, the drug first goes to the liver and then goes to the blood and then to the target organ. And in the liver, with the first pass metabolism, it interferes with all the other things and causes of all the side effects. With it lowers the IGF-1, so the growth spurt is lesser, thrombosis, dyslipidemia, and hypertension. So all the side effects of estrogen comes with the oral one. So the drug of choice would be transdermal for us because it avoids. Now the drugs available oral, we've got the ethinyl estradiol, the estradiol valerate, and the conjugated equine estrogen. We also have 17-beta estradiol as oral preparation for all the, infertility specialists know about it. It's quite costly. We have the topical, we've got sprays available. We've got creams available for 17 beta estradiol in our country, but we don't have the patches. So the oral medication of 17 beta estradiol, it comes by the name of Estrabet. There are many generic Indian versions also. It's a bit costly compared to other estrogens that are available, but because it's an active drug, it has lesser of the side effects. It's also available in a transdermal form, the estrogel spray and the cream, and it gives, say, about 1.25 grams of the cream will give you 750 micrograms of the drug. So that's the preparation which is available. Estrogel spray is available. It's a metered dose one. Why I'm telling you this, because it's very difficult to follow the protocols of pubertal inductions that are given in the books and that we use, because the kind of preparations that are available to us, it's very difficult to dose them. So estradiol valerate, everybody knows, it's very easily available. Progainova, the dosage is 1 milligram, 2 milligram, but it has got all the unfavorable side effects that I was talking about. We've got Linoral available, not freely available, but you can ask the company to make it available. The dose that we require, 2 microgram, is not available. So 10 microgram is available. So very difficult to dose it. And CEE in the past, many senior pediatric endocrinologists must be aware of the conjugated equine estrogens, Premarin, but we are not using it very frequently now because of all the other ones available. So the equivalent dose of giving in pubertal induction is basically 1 milligram of 17 beta estradiol is equal to 1 milligram of Valerate, Progainova, 10 micrograms of Linoral, and 0.3 milligrams of Premarin. So the dose that is generally recommended is 10% of adult dose. Adult dose is 2 milligrams for both Valerate and Estrabet, which means that we'll be giving 20 micrograms as the starting dose for these patients. So oral 7, this is Professor Jacqueline et al. From Melbourne Royal Children's Hospital. Her regimen is with oral 17 beta estradiol, commence around 12 years of bone age for Turner syndrome and as soon as possible for HH. And then starting dose is 0.5 milligrams, which is 50 micrograms, alternate dose, which comes around 25 micrograms per day for 6 months, and gradually increase it by 0.5 milligrams daily, and 1 year of 1 milligram. And, once 2 years of starting the dose, in the last year, start doing scans, look for endometrial thickness, and add progesterone only when the periods start, or it's at least 2.5 years after the start of estrogen. Now, how much progesterone to be given? It is at least 12 to 14 days to prevent the development of endometrial hyperplasia. Modified regime, I will not go into details, but people have modified them in various ways and got optimal results from point of view of breast and uterine size. Future fertility studies are not available because it's so rare that these, patients generally go to that age, and, we don't have studies available. Now, this is for the transdermal patch. We don't have the patch. With patch, it is easy because you can cut it into 4, halves, 1/4 of a patch for 4 days, and that kind of regimes. We are talking with a lot of industry people for making the patches available for induction, but these patients are so less that they are not in the agenda. Coming on to with Linoral, definitely in the past we had 2 microgram available. That time it was easy, but with a 20 microgram and 10 microgram tablet, very, very difficult to use this regimen because it's very difficult to. One thing that we used to do is to, break the tablet into powder and then divide it into 10 parts and then give it. So which is a very, very organized way of giving it. Progesterone, again, we've got 4 types of progesterones available. The physiological one is micronized progesterone, but giving it orally causes a lot of side effects, especially postural hypotension and even these things, but it's most physiological. It's most costly as well. Medroxyprogesterone, norethistron, both these drugs are, synthetically prepared progesterones, are androgenic, have side effects of thrombosis, and norethistron given at a very high dose can be hepatotoxic. So those are the things, but it is very cheap and easily available. And for the other one, the dydrogesterone, this drug has very minimal side effects, but it is quite costly. So these are the progesterone. The minimum dose, as we said, is 10 milligrams for at least 12 to 14 days. But it's not needed that you give it every month. If you're giving every 2 months, every 3 months, then also it is able to prevent development of endometrial hyperplasia. So pubertal induction in uterine size, there are many studies available. Now, the policy is to use the double lock policy, which means that you are giving it gradually with a low dose, not start progesterone unless you have an endometrial thickness of at least 8 mm. So in the last year, so after 2 years of estrogen, do the scans to look at the endometrial thickness. And if it is 8 mm, the better policy, and if you've not reached your Tanner 4 stage of breast, and uterine size, as I said, 6 into 4 into 3. So if that optimal size is not there, then you can actually decrease the dose of estrogen. Go slow. Instead of, adding progesterone, decrease the dose of estrogen, and then basically add progesterone only when your desired clinical results are there. So we have to be very, very careful, and that job is going to be the endocrinologist's job to give them optimal size breast, optimal size uterus to have a proper sort of a development as far as their fertility is concerned. So how do we monitor? So you all know about the monitoring. We have to look for the side effects. We have to see whether our dose is right or not. It's not needed to do the bone density scan so frequently, but it would be a good thing to do it once your periods have started. So see that how much bone accrual has occurred. And if it is low in conjunction with the endocrinologist, we generally want to make their bones better. Now, coming on to the management, I'll just touch base with the infertility management in these patients. So we all know they have got some problem with either the hypothalamic region or the pituitary region, but their gonads are normal. Now, some key features for the gynecologist and for the endocrinologist here, management of fertility for all the hypothalamic causes, the pituitary is normal. So GnRH, it's not available with us, but GnRH will work. For pituitary causes, only we will have the gonadotropins that will work. So for the gynecologist, it's very important that in pituitary, sometimes it's isolated gonadotropin deficiency, but other times it could be a multiple pituitary hormone deficiency. So if you've got a patient with hypogonadotropic hypogonadism with you, it's very important to rule out other causes. So you rule out whether there is the thyroid axis is also compromised, the adrenal axis is compromised. So involve the endocrinologist. Very important, because these patients will not respond to GnRH therapy. The replacement for thyroxine and cortisol should begin before you go ahead for the ovulation induction. And sometimes these patients will require growth hormone as well if it's a complete multiple pituitary hormone deficiency, and that's why they don't function. Now, very important point in patients of hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, AMH and antral follicle counts are low. And very frequently, if you're not doing the workup properly, we can actually label them premature ovarian failure. And then, we'll very quickly send them for ovarian donation cycles and IVF when they can, get their own eggs. So AMH and antral follicle count in these particular patients do not give a proper assessment of ovarian reserve. And that should be actually interpreted in terms of what the LH and FSH is. And if the LH FSH is low normal, then we need to retest these patients. Coming on to, because congenital hypogonadotropic hypogonadism includes Kalaman syndrome and other syndromes, when you are offering them fertility with their own oocytes, it's important to get a genetic counseling done, because it could be, something that is transferred to the, so all the other things like prenatal testing and everything can be done if they are tested for the actual gene, what is causing the disorder. It's not mandatory though. I'll just touch base on gonadorelin. It's available in Europe. It's not even available in US, not available with us. So it's a, pulsatile therapy. And besides hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, it can be used in a subgroup of patients of polycystic ovarian syndrome, the ones who have functional adrenal hyperplasia and who've got the peak GnRH pulses being very, deep, and that's why they do not ovulate. In both patients, if you use the pump for a year, there is almost 90 to 95% success rate with this therapy, but it doesn't work for pituitary patients. Coming on to our, I'll just skip this one. So we'll come to the ovulation induction with gonadotropins because it's available in our country. And the gonadotropins that we use is generally human menopausal gonadotropin because we require both LH and FSH in these patients. So we all know for the gynecologists, baseline low level threshold levels of LH are required for follicular development. So if we just give pure recombinant FSH, it's not going to work for them. We've got the Menopur, which is specially designed for this purpose, but we also have urinary HMGs available, various brands available. Cost is somewhere between 900 to 1,000 rupees per vial per 75 IU. Now, these patients require on an average about 3,000 to 3,500 international units for a single egg. So it's very costly treatment for them. We also have a more physiological version called Pergoveris available, where we don't require a lot of LH. So it's a 2:1 ratio. I think Pergoveris would be the drug of choice. Basically, one of the other things with infertility management in these patients is that if we look at the development of oocytes, so oocytes don't, I was talking about AMH and AFC. So once the primary follicles are becoming antral follicles, first is the stage of a microscopic antral follicle. So I'll just skip base. I'll come back to this one. So I'll come to this one. Basically, the antral follicles of 2 to 5 mm are the macroscopic antral follicles that we can see on ultrasound. Actually, these are the follicles that are actually making the AMH. There are microscopic antral follicles as well, which are somewhat gonadotropin responsive. So growth from primary follicle to antral follicle, the Graafian follicle microscopic, is gonadotropin independent. But to grow from there to become macroscopically, so from 100 micrometer to 2 millimeter size follicle, that growth takes about 60 days, 2 months prior to ovulation, and is gonadotropin dependent. And because these patients have no gonadotropins, that's why they don't have this growth happening between the microscopic and macroscopic antral follicles. And that's why the antral follicles, if you do after an HRT treatment in these patients, we don't see any antral follicles. And they look like a pseudo premature ovarian failure patients. Their ovaries look small. So it's important when we give basically ovulation induction in these, sorry. So can I go back? Upper? No. Lower. So coming on to ovulation induction, when we do ovulation induction, in a normal patient, it's 10 days of stimulation. The follicle is there and you do the timed intercourse or egg collection or whatever the plan is for the fertility. Here we have to at least give 20-25 days for the follicles to start growing. So start with low dose 75 international unit and see this thing weekly. And if you don't see the follicle, don't increase the dose. You have to keep on giving the threshold levels. Once you start seeing the follicles, that's when the dose should be increased. And that's why we require a very careful. Sometimes if a patient has MPHD, we have to start giving them, we have to give them even, basically growth hormones. Now, because these patients have no endogenous LH surge, they won't have any premature ovarian ovulation. So no need to give any down regulation in these patients. Trigger has to be high dose. Don't give agonist trigger in these patients. Not going to work. And especially if it is a pituitary failure. If it is a hypothalamic disease, agonist will work. And then whatever treatment fertility you are doing, ovulation induction, timed intercourse, IUI, IVF, do that. Luteal phase support is must. So they will form a corpus luteum, but that corpus luteum is not going to be sustained because they don't have any endogenous LH. So these are some key features in their ovulation induction that you will have to give a very stringent luteal phase support. Otherwise, pregnancy won't happen. So that's important. The key features, better success of isolated because they have the intact LH FSH system. Once you do, there is some low level threshold level LH being there, so they work better. compared to MPHD. Prolonged stimulation is needed, and AMH is definitely a better predictor than AFC. Don't go by AFC here. So that's one condition where we don't look at AFC. Even though nature doesn't want us to interfere. So the other thing that I really want to say is that with gonadotropins, definitely careful dosages are very important, because you can have a hyperstimulation, you can have ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, everything happens. Even multiple pregnancy is poor prognosis in these patients. We've done a pubertal induction in them. Their uteruses are not naturally made. So definitely we want to give them only a singleton pregnancy. Growth hormone, we use growth hormone for our MPHD patients. So adjuvant growth hormone in ovulation induction along with gonadotropin in this subgroup really works wonders and results. So so in MPHD patients, generally you will want to give them HRT for at least 3 to 6 months prior to, if they are not on continuous treatment. If they're already on continuous treatment, we can begin. Definitely cover for the thyroxine and the adrenal excess. Growth hormone has to be started prior to the ovulation induction, at least for a minimum of, so it has 15 days, and it has to be continued till the first trimester, throughout the LPS and in the first trimester, to have the best results. This is optional, but definitely IGF-1 levels give us a good idea that our growth hormone is in the right phase. Gonadotropin stimulation, as I said, if you're doing an IVF, a high dose, low dose, if you're not doing, and then this is the study. I'll just skip based on this and come to take-home messages. So very important that pubertal induction has to be started at the right time with a low dose, with small increments, and addition of progesterone, a little later to have final breast and uterine maturation. Late onset pubertal induction, more than 16 years, actually compromises the final height. So that needs to be sent for pubertal induction, or pubertal induction started as soon as the diagnosis is made. And in this population, it is class 1 and ovulation, very high success rate, both for ovulation and pregnancy. I skipped because it was a little delayed, but the study was showing it. Thank you.
Now we would like to invite comments or questions from the audience, please.
First of all, I would like to say that it was a very comprehensive and very informative talk. And I want to ask how many patients you have encountered like this. HH is not very common, but it's common also. So how many patients you have encountered in your practice?
So actually we are running an adolescent clinic here. So I get a lot of patients from Anurag. So we transition patients from the pediatric age group to adult age group. So I have got almost like 10 patients who have transitioned. Walk-in patients are very less, because generally they are diagnosed as, ovarian failure, and then they go in for IVF. So that misdiagnosis is very common. And otherwise, if the pubertal induction was not done properly, they are all missed, actually. So I get more commonly the hypergonadotropic hypogonadism. So I have got 5 pregnancies with Turner syndrome. So that is, we did, for one of the patient, we did the pubertal inductions ourselves. So Anurag did the pubertal induction. That patient got married, transferred to me, and then we did ovulation induction for her. And she also had male factor. So we did IVF eventually for her. And she has a baby. She had coarctation of aorta as well. So it was a very difficult pregnancy. Then there are other 3 patients conceived, hypogonadotropic patient was there, conceived naturally on ovulation induction. So I have got 4 or 5 patients with me, but a lot of patients for pubertal induction. Generally, these patients are very difficult in our social scenarios. They don't get married. Very, that fertility thing is a little something to continue with me. It becomes a bit difficult. Yeah.